try to think about it from the reader's or viewer's perspective or consumer's perspective. What are they going to hear that I may or may not actually have said? And try to make sure you're covering your bases there. The guest speaking about a third party who then comes and sues the podcaster, I would say is the most, or threatens the podcaster, is the most common. And that's where, again, if, the opinions of our guests or what our guests say is, it's them, it's not us, may or may not actually protect you to have that disclaimer, but it sure isn't going to hurt. Under copyright law, if an independent contractor makes creative work, they own it, not the contract, not the party that hired them. So you want to have a written contract that turns that back around the right way.
If you want to build a legitimate, profitable online business without shiny objects, without the hypey gimmicks, and without the stress and overwhelm, if you want to make more money without having to be present online all day, every day, pumping out content that nobody sees and hustling DMs to generate leads and sales, then this is the place for you. Welcome to the Digital Trailblazer podcast, your online business university, where you'll learn how ordinary people start from ground zero with no influence, no email list or audience to sell to, and no business or marketing experience, and go from working 9-to-5 jobs to building successful 6- and 7-figure online businesses and all the steps in between. Learn the strategies that worked and what didn't. Learn the mistakes that they made and how to avoid them, and then learn their plans for scaling their businesses and taking things to the next level. All so that you can build your business faster and easier and make more money without sacrificing the things that are important to you in your life. I'm your host, Leah Ray Getz, and with me is my husband, Todd. Now, let's get to it with today's guest. Welcome, Digital Trailblazers. It's Leah Ray Getz, and I am super excited to reintroduce you to Gordon Firemark. He's actually our first two-timer, if you will, coming back to the podcast. So congratulations.
Right on.
That. We're super excited to have you. We've actually had some questions and I've been talking to some people on that. Who would be better than Gordon to come on and speak to these topics? So go ahead and give a little of your backstory of who you are and such, so that people who maybe missed that first episode or it's been a while, they get acquainted to you.
Okay, well, you introduced me. I'm Gordon Firemark. I am a lawyer. In a lot of in the podcasting circles, they call me the podcast lawyer. And I have been focused on entertainment, media, and business law for coming up on 33 years in law practice, and working with folks in the digital media and new media in large part for the last decade and a half almost. I'm a podcaster myself, and so I started a show called Entertainment Law Update back in 2009. So OG podcaster, created the legal resources and stuff on this really to scratch my own itch, and now I'm really happy to share them and advise clients in the field. So
yeah, I'm super pumped to have you here. So we've been diving more into different areas of content creation ourselves. Plus, we've been interacting and diving deeper into just the podcasting space. And so more and more questions are being raised, and I don't have the answer to them. I'm like, podcast lawyer, we should talk. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of stuff going on in the online marketing space. There's talk about FTC, crackdowns in many different areas. And people want to kind of make sure they're playing safe and they're learning the rules, because there's like no barrier of entry, right? Like we can all pick up something and start recording stuff or doing a video and with no knowledge of what kind of repercussions could come from that. So if you could maybe give us a little bit of an overview kind of stuff, and then we can kind of dive into some details, I think that'd be really helpful.
Okay, great. Well, first off, I think we should be really clear that, yeah, they call me the podcast lawyer. I talk about podcasts. And when I talk about podcasts, I'm really talking a little more broadly about, digital media creation, whether it's a blog or a podcast or a live stream or a YouTube video or a self-hosted video or anything that we're creating, online courses even. The legal frameworks are largely the same, and we have many of the same concerns. And so this will apply more broadly than just to the guy in the closet with the microphone and the earphones making an audio podcast. So, or the gal. Anyway, there are a bunch of areas of liability that can kick in for someone who's creating content. And we've talked about some of those in the past episode, is, things like copyrights and trademarks and libel and slander, defamation liability, privacy, all of those kinds of things. And we've talked about the need for, having good contracts and business structures and all those kinds of things in place. And one of the things that comes up often in the content world is when you're creating content that is either meant as advice or could be interpreted as advice or sets people up with certain kinds of expectations that you may or may not want them to act on without doing a little more deeper digging. And that's where we get into the area of disclaimers. Now, you also mentioned the FTC and regulatory frameworks, and that's an area that we can also talk about. It's the area of disclosures, and they're very related concepts. So pick one and let's talk about it first.
Okay, so what's the difference between disclaimer and disclosure first for all of our non-legal people?
Okay, well, a disclosure is really just telling your audience something that they should know in order to, I guess, so they can behave or make a purchasing decision or whatever with full information. So in the advertising space, if you're advertising a product, and we've all seen the box of cereal where the cornflakes are enlarged on the front, and it says, a product, the photograph doesn't reflect actual product size or those kinds of things. That's sort of a hybrid disclosure disclaimer. But in podcasting in particular, we get into questions of endorsements and influencer deals where you might be paid for sharing a message or talking about a particular product, or maybe you're given a free copy of something to unbox on your live stream, all of those things. If there's a brand involved and there's money changing or value changing hands, if there's some kind of a financial relationship, the FTC, the U.S. government agency that deals with consumer protection and advertising, requires that relationship be disclosed. And it has to be a clear, conspicuous disclosure of the nature of that relationship. If you've got an affiliate link and you're telling people, go to this link and buy the product and you're going to get paid, you got to tell them. If you got free goods, you got to tell them. If they paid you just cash to make the message, then that's a sponsored message, and it needs to be clear that that's what's happening. So that's that. And look, the financial relationship might be a little more hidden than those three examples. So you really just need to be on the lookout for that. And the FTC haven't really come into the podcasting space yet, but they're cracking down on the influencers, and we're starting to see some lawsuits involving influencers who were involved in promoting crypto products and things like that. And turns out they had an ownership stake in the company and they didn't tell you, and those kinds of things. So really, as a consumer, it's the stuff that if it would have made you think differently about deciding what to do, that's the kind of information that needs to be, we call it material disclosure, material information. So that's the disclosure side. Now, a disclaimer is designed to be more, I'm going to use a big word, legally exculpatory, stuff that will get you out of the legal hot water that the content might otherwise get you into. Mm-hmm. So, and there are lots of different flavors and styles of disclaimers that we need to think about. So,
yeah, I'd love to, because I mean, that we work with people who are doing health related topics, right? And they're bringing on guests that are talking about anything in the health and wellness space. And I know from my time as a nurse, and then even the little dabbling years ago that I did in network marketing and health and wellness, there's disclaimer kind of stuff that needs to be involved and things you can and cannot say when it comes to stuff.
Well, before we dive into the health area, which is a big one, the legal area is a big one too. So I'm going to just issue a disclaimer of my own right now. And that is to say to your listeners and your viewers, I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. And if you are going to have a legal issue, you really need to consult your own attorney. Don't take this information as custom tailored legal advice. Every situation is a little different, and you really need to do your own due diligence and consult with an attorney that's been hired and has a duty to give you custom tailored information. So that's my stay out of legal trouble card.
Thank you. We want you to stay out of trouble.
All right. So health and medicine, absolutely one of the big areas, because let's face it, if you and I start talking and you tell me that, drinking a tablespoon of bleach every day is a sure way not to die from cancer. It's true. It is actually a true statement. I'm going to die from bleach consumption. But you don't want your listeners doing either, right? So you're going to tell them, listen, this is a controversial thing, or get your own custom tailored medical advice. Talk to your doctor before you start this exercise regimen. These kinds of things. It's really important so that you don't end up having somebody come out of the woodwork and say, well, wait a minute, you told me to do this and I followed your instructions and I had this negative outcome. So the disclaimer is it's a disclosure of the nature of the relationship along with a warning. Hey, I'm not going to be responsible. Don't look at me. Take this and do with it as you will.
Yeah. So if a host brings on someone who's saying stuff like that, should the host have it part of their end cap on their the end little clip that they play on their thing? Should they just have it on their website? What does this actually look like?
Oh, this is a great question. So you remember earlier I said it needs to be clear and conspicuous. And if you look at the behavior of consumption of content, people don't always watch till the end. So just putting it at the end probably doesn't do the job because they never heard it. Clear and conspicuous probably, in the case of the kind of disclaimers we're talking about, probably means at the beginning of the show and the end of the show, in the audio, in the video, on the webpage, all of that. And maybe even right there adjacent to those most controversial statements. One important one that I think a lot of folks should use is something to say, hey, this episode, the views of our guests are not necessarily the views of our hosts, of our producers, or something like that. That way you can look at the opinions expressed are those of our guests or those of our hosts, and they shouldn't reflect on anyone else. If you have sponsors, your sponsor may not want to be tarred with the brush of the bleach, the bleach medicine guy. So, that's the kind of thing you want to think about. But clear and conspicuous means that it needs to be plain language, unequivocal, and right there next to or as close to the thing as possible. In the affiliate advertising arena, it's supposed to be right there next to the link whenever it shows up. So you say, hey, this is an affiliate link, use it.
And do people understand, if you say affiliate link, is that enough? Or do you have to say I make money when this...
Probably need to be a little more explicit than just describing an affiliate link, unless your listeners are savvy to that kind of a thing. So if you're talking to network marketers, they know.
Right.
If you're talking to, new moms, they may not have any sense of what that is.
Okay. Clear and conspicuous. So making sure that it's out there in the actual content itself, not a little tag on at the end or whatever. And then is there anything, I was listening to someone being interviewed the other day on a health podcast, and she was claiming essentially to heal depression with her mind or something. It was using terminology that my gut said, I think you're not supposed to say you can heal things that have an actual medical diagnosis with it.
Right.
Because then you're getting into practice medicine and there's issues.
Yeah, if your kidneys don't work, just grow a new one.
It's all in the power of your mind.
Yeah, look, there's always going to be a line. And now, the line works both ways. One is, if the things are so far-fetched that the audience may not really buy it, first of all, I would question, why are you having this person on as a guest? But, maybe it's for entertainment. Maybe it's for some other purpose. Or maybe it's because you want to then have a deeper discussion and criticism of what was said. That's fine. And then you're going to sort of naturally do the disclosure and disclaimer kind of thing. But if you're perceived as buying into it or presenting it as gospel, then, that's where the problems come up. And if something is that far-fetched, well, maybe you come out and just say, well, that's a pretty controversial statement, Ms. So-and-so. And, I just want to remind our listeners, be sure you do consult with a medical professional. It can be really fluid and organic.
That makes sense. Okay. I like that. Having that in your little toolbox when someone says something, you're like, I'm not sure about that. So
it means you have to be listening, which is one of the things that a lot of interviewers don't do well.
That's so true.
And also, I think you want to have an editor. Someone else should be watching and listening to the episode also, just to catch it. Another set of eyes and ears, always a good idea.
If we flip this around, another type of because we're in the business space. So we have people share about their business results, their successes, what they're getting, what their clients are getting. What kind of is it the kind of income disclaimers, or is any of that kind of stuff needed when someone's talking about their personal success or the success of their clients or anything like that?
I think it's a good idea to, whenever you're talking about success and financial stuff, it is a good idea to say, your mileage may vary. This is what happened for me, or this is what happened for our guest. That's one way to that may be a little bit of a glib way of articulating, but you know what I'm saying, is these results may not be typical. You shouldn't necessarily expect that you'll get the same. And look, if you're talking about, let's say, Facebook advertising, and you say, hey, advertise on Facebook, you put in $100, you're going to get $200 out. Well, you can't guarantee that. There's so many different variables. And as long as you're being clear that, well, I can't guarantee that, but there's lots of variables, but it is possible, then you're doing okay. And the disclaimer sort of becomes an organic part of the discussion.
Gotcha.
Although it's not a bad idea on the website and in the end of the episode, say, hey, your mileage may vary kind of message. I think that's important. This is true in the financial arena, the business and marketing arena. Certainly, financial advisors, people in the brokerage community, those kinds of, they know they're not supposed to go and give investment advice online, but they do. Some of them do anyway, or they make these broad generalizations. So even then, you may want to, include the right kind of warning of a sort to protect people. In the legal arena, as I did before, general information, and it's always good to say, we're here to provide you with general information. What you do with it is your business. But make sure you handle your business well, something along those lines. Exercise, people get hurt because they tried to do some crazy gym maneuver or whatever, If there's a possibility of somebody getting hurt from what you're telling them, that's where the warning should be.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for people who are hearing this now and they have old blog posts, or they've got old podcast episodes, or they're like, oh shoot, maybe I should do something with that. Like, is it worth taking things down and editing them and republishing? Is it if you're small enough, leave it and just do it right from here on out? Or what do you?
Well, I think it would make sense to work both backward and forward from the current moment in time. Certainly going forward. And go backward, to the stuff that's most likely to show up. I think you use your analytics. You look at which are the posts that are getting a lot of hits and a lot of eyeballs and those kinds of things, and check them carefully. And if there's stuff in there that calls for a disclaimer or disclosure, put it in. Do you have to go back and do let's say you do a blog post a day for the last 10 years? Well, that's hundreds of thousands of episodes, right? That's just not practical. If you're doing a revamp or a recreation of the website, maybe that's a time to trim the fat also. Think of this as an opportunity, not as an obligation necessarily. It's an opportunity to clarify and be a better service to your audience.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So kind of just being an educated host is what I'm hearing, being aware when there should be some sort of, mileage may vary type of thing throughout the episodes, and then having also maybe adding some additional pieces in editing and things to be able to make things super clear when necessary.
And it's, if you have a show that's of the kind where you're going to do disclaimers every episode, then you might want to build it into the intro and the outro of the show, those kinds of things. But it's still worthwhile, I think, to interject in the middle, where it's appropriate. Sometimes someone will say something on the show or you're interviewing that's just completely out of left field, and it is appropriate and proper to just say, really? That doesn't sound right. Explain, draw them out a little more. That kind of skepticism will also alert the audience that they should probably be skeptical too. So that's sort of an organic approach to it. And that's journalism, honestly.
Have you seen in your bigger sphere of podcasting and network and everything, have you seen some of this stuff not go so well? Some lessons learned, even, you can removing names and whatever else, but
Yeah, it's interesting. There aren't a lot of lawsuits in the podcast space. I think some of that is, as you know, the nature of podcasting is such a congenial, collaborative family kind of a vibe that I think podcasters just don't find themselves in the crosshairs of lawsuits very often unless they're really crossing a big name, someone with a lot of power. And I think most of the cases just don't make it that far. They get settled very quickly or whatever. But I have personally heard of a few instances where someone has received that nasty letter from a lawyer or something like that. So it does come up. It's not that common. Sometimes it has to do with something you said about someone. There's, actually the guest speaking about a third party who then comes and sues the podcaster, I would say is the most, or threatens the podcaster, is the most common. And that's where, again, if, the opinions of our guests or what our guests say is, it's them, it's not us, may or may not actually protect you to have that disclaimer, but it sure isn't going to hurt.
Now, you mentioned a few other things that can be a slippery slope or dangerous or problems or things you need to think about, like slander or libel, that sort of thing. Can you define some of those things and just give some general ideas for the non-lawyer people?
Okay, so libel and slander are different sides or different versions of a larger tort, we call it, called defamation. Fundamentally, it's the same. It's slander is the spoken word version, and libel is anytime there's technology and a bigger audience. So podcasts, blogs, all those things are going to look like libel. What it is a false statement that seems to be factual about a person that causes harm to their reputation. So if I call you a child molester, and you're not, if you are, it's not libel. But if you're not, and it hurts your reputation because people believe me, that's libel. So that's a big one that when you're talking about people, you need to be concerned. Invasions of privacy are sort of what you would think, but there are flavors that you might not expect, like just using a person's name in a commercial way without their permission could be, false endorsement kind of a scenario. Maybe that's where a disclaimer, hey, so-and-so didn't have anything to do with this product. Okay. Other forms of privacy, false light, creating a false impression about a person, or, the classic is actually intruding into someone's personal space, solitude, those kinds of things. And I think I covered them. Oh, a false, public disclosure of private stuff. There are some things that even if it's true, the world doesn't have any reason to know who you have sex with, how you like to do it, and under what circumstances, those kinds of things, unless you're in the sex business maybe, or something like that. So again, it's context sensitive. What else? Libel, slander, privacy, copyright, of course, that's when you copy someone else's work without permission. Trademarks are the brands and logos and things like that identify the source of goods or services. That's an interesting one where disclaimers sometimes come into play. If we're talking about Coca-Cola, I love the way Coca-Cola tastes. It's fantastic. It's got that hint of this and cinnamon and da-da-da-da. That's fine. But if we title the episode or we call the show the Coca-Cola Cast, that's not going to be so okay. So this is an area where you probably want to, if you think there's a thing, there probably is one, and you should talk to a lawyer or just think again.
Right. Or just go a different direction. Good. I like it. Okay. So because I think a lot of people are, kind of bootstrapping things a bit and just figuring it out as they go. Yeah. Right. So what are some of the things that you should maybe invest in for like templates or like some of the basic kind of stuff just to make sure your house is in order and kind of protected?
Well, thank you for a kind of a softball there. I appreciate it. I am here to help podcasters create their content without fear or concern, allowing them to be bold so they can have a big impact and achieve influence and hopefully income from what they're doing. And my whole approach is based on sort of 4 pillars. One is the business structure you want to have. I think that if you're going to be in the business of monetizing the creation of work, you need to have some kind of a business entity, a corporation or an LLC or something that sort of shields your personal from your business stuff and vice versa. If your podcast or whatever is in the business, it's part of a marketing initiative for a business, then you're probably already covered under that company's entity. But that again, this is one of those your mileage may vary, talk to a lawyer situations. So there's the business structure, the relationships with the people, the personnel, the team is another area where you need to have good contracts with the people who are working for you. If they're not just even if they are an employee, you need to define what their job roles and expectations are and how they're compensated and what they own and don't own as a result of their efforts. Because under copyright law, if an independent contractor makes creative work, they own it, not the contract, not the party that hired them. So you want to have a written contract that turns that back around the right way. You want to have your intellectual property protected by registering your copyrights and protecting your trademark. If you have a distinctive, this is one of the most common things. People wait too long to do this and then it causes problems. If you have a distinctive title for your podcast or your YouTube channel or your blog or whatever you're doing, protect it. You don't want other people coming in and using titles that are the same or very similar and causing confusion in the marketplace about, well, now which basket weaving show am I listening to? You want them to know Out of the Basket with Gordon is my podcast. That's not really my show, but you get what I'm saying. So that's the third pillar. And then the fourth one is, as you get into monetizing, you have to have a plan. You have to have the structures, all those other things set up before you can monetize. And then you need to have good, clear, articulate contracts with the people who are going to be paying you, and not just that they promise to pay you, but that you can actually collect on those promises. So there are lots of resources out there. I provide a lot of resources. I have a whole slew of templates available at a template store. If you go to podcastlawforums.com, you can access those templates. And I have a course/template program that will teach you step by step how to do each of these things. Form your LLC, register your trademarks and copyrights, make those contracts with your team, and the monetization stuff. Step-by-step walkthrough instructions, so it's simple and easy, and you don't have to spend the money of hiring a lawyer if that's the situation you're in, either because you don't like lawyers or you don't want to afford lawyers or whatever. I'm trying to have something for everybody. And to that end, I'm just putting the finishing touches on a free report on disclaimers for folks that cover the topic that we're talking about here today. So you can come on over to gordonfiremark.com/disclaimer. And, it's disclaimer guide, all one word, disclaimer guide. And pop your email address into the form and we'll send you this report.
Yeah, I think we really appreciate you putting that together for our folks. That's going to be massively helpful. And just, I hope that our viewers have a bit more of a peace of mind and just understanding of this whole space of how to set yourself up to be careful and safe.
Yeah, I think the best advice I can give anybody is, when you're creating your content, whatever the content is, try to think about it from the reader's or viewer's perspective or consumer's perspective. What are they going to hear that I may or may not actually have said? And try to make sure you're covering your bases there and maintain the trust you have with your audience, because that's the most valuable asset there is, by just being very straight and transparent with them about things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we really appreciate you jumping on last minute, coming on, doing some really good, just, knocking it out kind of content for our people. We appreciate you. We'll have the links for everything that Gordon is talking about in the show notes and description. Thank you, Gordon. We really appreciate it.
Leah, it's been great being with you. Thanks again for having me.
You've been listening to the Digital Trailblazer podcast. For show notes and information about today's guest, head to digitaltrailblazer.com. Now, if you love this episode, if you got some value, make sure you leave us a review and subscribe. And be sure to share this episode with anyone you know who could use help to build their business. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.